Saturday, July 10, 1943, marked the opening of the Allied invasion of Sicily, and before dawn that morning, General George S. Patton stood at the edge of one of the largest amphibious operations of World War II, commanding forces whose composition reflected the full complexity of the United States Army. Among those soldiers were Native Americans from the Southwest, including Apache men serving in frontline units, individuals whose reputations for endurance, fieldcraft, and aggression were already well known inside the Army, even if rarely discussed in public narratives of the war. By the time World War II reached the Mediterranean, the United States military had a long and complicated history with Native American warriors. For generations, Apache fighters had been portrayed as adversaries of the U.S. Army, masters of irregular warfare who understood terrain, movement, and survival in extreme conditions. Now, in a global conflict that demanded precisely those skills, Apache soldiers found themselves wearing American uniforms, operating under commanders like Patton, and fighting enemies thousands of miles from their homelands. There was no officially designated Apache Battalion within Patton's command, but Apache soldiers were concentrated within certain regiments, particularly in the 45th Infantry Division, known as the Thunderbird Division. This unit drew heavily from Oklahoma, New Mexico, Arizona, and surrounding regions, and included hundreds of Native American soldiers from multiple tribes. Patton took special notice of these men during training and combat, not because of myth, but because of measurable performance in maneuver, reconnaissance, and endurance under pressure. Patton believed in offensive momentum above all else. In World War II, his doctrine emphasized speed, aggression, and constant pressure on the enemy. Soldiers who could operate independently, adapt to chaos, and maintain discipline under fire fit perfectly into this philosophy. Apache soldiers, many of whom grew up in harsh environments that demanded self-reliance and physical resilience, quickly earned reputations for exactly those qualities during training exercises and early engagements. During the Sicilian campaign, Patton pushed his forces hard, often faster than supply lines or higher command expected. Units were ordered to advance across broken terrain under intense heat with limited rest. In these conditions, Apache soldiers were frequently assigned to advance patrols, scouting missions, and point positions. Their ability to move quietly, read terrain, and maintain cohesion under exhaustion made them invaluable in the fluid battles that characterized Patton's operations in World War II. Within the Army, there was a quiet unease about unleashing soldiers with such aggressive reputations. This fear was not based on discipline problems, but on political and cultural memory. The same traits once used to justify campaigns against Apache resistance were now being recognized as military assets. Officers were aware that public narratives of World War II emphasized unity and democracy, while the presence of Apache warriors on European battlefields carried uncomfortable historical echoes. Patton himself was less concerned with symbolism and more focused on results. He judged soldiers by performance alone. Reports from Sicily consistently highlighted the effectiveness of Native American troops in maintaining formation under fire, navigating unfamiliar terrain, and sustaining momentum during extended operations. In Patton's command culture, such performance translated into trust and responsibility, regardless of background. As the campaign progressed, Apache soldiers participated in grueling advances through mountainous regions, where visibility was limited and enemy positions were often concealed. These environments mirrored aspects of the terrain their ancestors had mastered generations earlier, though now against German and Italian forces equipped with modern weapons. In World War II, the battlefield demanded both technological proficiency and human adaptability, and Apache soldiers demonstrated both. The fear some officers expressed was not that these men would act uncontrollably, but that their effectiveness challenged long-standing assumptions about race, capability, and leadership within the U.S. Army. World War II forced institutions to confront contradictions between ideology and practice, and Apache soldiers under Patton embodied those contradictions. They were disciplined, effective, and loyal, yet drawn from communities historically marginalized by the nation they now served. Patton's operational tempo left little room for hesitation. During rapid advances, Apache soldiers were often among the first to engage retreating enemy forces, conducting pursuit operations that demanded endurance and initiative. These actions were not isolated incidents, but part of a broader pattern in which Native American soldiers consistently performed above expectations in high-stress roles. In Italy and later in Western Europe, similar patterns emerged. Apache soldiers continued to serve within integrated units, adapting to new climates, new enemies, and new tactical demands. World War II was not a static conflict, and the ability to transition between environments was crucial. Apache soldiers demonstrated that adaptability repeatedly, reinforcing Patton's belief in aggressive, flexible warfare. The idea that the United States was afraid to unleash these men reflects less a formal policy than an institutional discomfort. Military planners understood the value of their skills, but were cautious about how those skills would be perceived, both within the army and by the public. World War II propaganda emphasized technological superiority and industrial power, leaving little space for acknowledging the contributions of warriors whose strength lay in human adaptability and fieldcraft. Patton's internal communications reveal no hesitation in deploying Apache soldiers wherever the situation demanded. He valued initiative and despised timidity, and units that demonstrated aggressiveness were rewarded with greater operational responsibility. In this environment, Apache soldiers found themselves repeatedly at the forefront of movement, contact, and exploitation phases of combat. Beyond combat effectiveness, these soldiers also influenced unit culture. Their calm under fire and matter-of-fact approach to danger set behavioral standards that others followed. In World War II, morale was as much about example as rhetoric, and Apache soldiers provided a steady presence that reinforced Patton's expectations of toughness and resilience. The psychological dimension of warfare also played a role. Enemy forces encountering aggressive, relentless advances often attributed them to elite or specially trained units, while Apache soldiers were not designated as such. Their effectiveness contributed to this perception. In World War II, perception could shape outcomes, influencing enemy withdrawal or resistance in subtle but significant ways. Despite their contributions, Apache soldiers rarely received public recognition during the war years. The official narrative focused on divisions, generals, and battles, not the cultural backgrounds of individual soldiers. This omission was not unique to Apache troops, but reflected broader patterns of representation in World War II history. Patton's focus remained fixed on operational success. He believed that victory justified intensity, and he drove his units accordingly. Apache soldiers, accustomed to hardship and long endurance, were able to sustain this pace, reinforcing Patton's confidence in their reliability under extreme conditions. The absence of a formally named Apache Battalion did not diminish their collective impact. Their presence within Patton's forces shaped outcomes in ways that official records often understated. World War II was fought by millions of individuals whose contributions blurred into unit histories, and Apache soldiers were among those whose influence exceeded their visibility. As campaigns continued, Apache soldiers adapted to mechanized warfare, coordinating with armor, artillery, and air support. Their effectiveness was not rooted in nostalgia or myth, but in their ability to integrate traditional field awareness with modern military systems. This synthesis was essential in World War II, where combined arms operations determined success. Patton's command style demanded constant forward motion, and Apache soldiers consistently met that demand. Whether advancing through Sicilian hills, Italian valleys, or later European terrain, they demonstrated a capacity to endure physical exhaustion while maintaining tactical awareness. Within the army, their performance quietly challenged stereotypes that had persisted for decades. Officers who initially viewed Native American soldiers through outdated lenses were forced to reassess those assumptions based on battlefield evidence. World War II accelerated this process by placing diverse soldiers in roles where performance could not be ignored. The broader significance of Apache soldiers under Patton lies not in a single battle or unit designation, but in what their service revealed about the nature of modern warfare. World War II demonstrated that effectiveness depended on adaptability, discipline, and resilience more than on preconceived notions of identity. Patton's relentless operations created an environment where only results mattered. Apache soldiers delivered those results repeatedly, earning trust through action rather than rhetoric. Their service under his command illustrates how World War II exposed the gap between institutional memory and operational reality. The men themselves rarely framed their service in symbolic terms. They fought because they were soldiers, committed to their units and to the survival of those beside them. In World War II, such motivations were common across backgrounds, yet Apache soldiers carried the additional weight of historical irony as former adversaries of the U.S. Army now fought its global enemies. As the war progressed, the contributions of Native American soldiers, including Apache men, became impossible to dismiss internally, even if public acknowledgement lagged behind. Their effectiveness under commanders like Patton contributed to gradual shifts in perception that would continue after World War II ended. Patton never romanticized these soldiers in his public statements, but his actions reflected respect earned through performance. Assignments, trust, and responsibility were his measures of value, and Apache soldiers consistently received all three. The story of Patton's so-called Apache Battalion is therefore not one of secrecy or fear in the literal sense, but of institutional hesitation giving way to operational necessity. World War II forced the United States Army to rely on every capable soldier, and Apache warriors proved indispensable within that reality. Their service stands as evidence that the qualities once feared or misunderstood became assets when the demands of global war stripped away illusions. Under Patton's command, Apache soldiers were not symbols or anomalies. They were fighters whose effectiveness shaped the outcomes of campaigns within World War II. As the European campaigns pushed deeper into contested territory, the Apache soldiers within Patton's formations encountered a new phase of World War II, one defined less by rapid advances and more by sustained pressure, attrition, and close coordination with armored and artillery units. The tempo remained unforgiving, but the nature of combat shifted, requiring constant adaptation to fortified positions, counterattacks, and shifting front lines. These conditions further highlighted the value of soldiers who could remain mentally steady amid prolonged uncertainty. Patton's Third Army, once unleashed across France, became synonymous with speed, but speed alone did not win battles in World War II. It required units capable of maintaining cohesion while advancing through towns, forests, and road networks where enemy resistance could appear suddenly. Apache soldiers often found themselves navigating these complex environments, operating in forward elements where situational awareness mattered as much as firepower. In villages recently abandoned by German forces, Apache soldiers were frequently tasked with reconnaissance and security, ensuring routes were safe for follow-on units. These missions demanded patience, restraint, and attention to subtle details, qualities not always associated with popular portrayals of aggressive warfare. World War II repeatedly demonstrated that victory depended on soldiers who could balance aggression with discipline, and Apache troops consistently met that standard. The integration of Apache soldiers into mechanized warfare further dispelled outdated assumptions. They worked alongside tank crews, engineers, and signal units, adapting quickly to the demands of combined arms operations. Radios, maps, and standardized procedures replaced older forms of communication, yet the underlying skill of reading terrain and anticipating enemy movement remained invaluable in World War II's fluid battles. Patton's leadership style placed immense psychological pressure on all under his command. He demanded long marches, minimal rest, and constant readiness to exploit opportunities. Apache soldiers, accustomed to endurance and self-reliance, were often able to absorb this pressure without a visible decline in performance. This resilience became an unspoken benchmark within units, influencing how others measured their own limits. The question of why the United States was hesitant to fully acknowledge or highlight these soldiers during World War II lies partly in the contradiction between wartime ideals and domestic realities. While Apache soldiers fought for freedom abroad, many returned home to communities still facing systemic discrimination. This tension made their story uncomfortable for official narratives that sought simplicity and unity. On the battlefield, however, such contradictions carried little weight. Survival and success depended on trust, and trust was built through action. Apache soldiers earned that trust repeatedly, not through reputation or heritage, but through reliability under fire. In World War II, the battlefield was an unforgiving judge, and it rendered its verdict without regard for race or background. Patton's after-action reports focused on momentum, resistance encountered, and objectives achieved. Within those metrics, Apache soldiers contributed directly to outcomes that shaped the broader campaign. Their presence influenced how units maneuvered, how quickly positions were secured, and how effectively pressure was maintained on retreating enemy forces. The psychological impact on opposing troops should not be underestimated. World War II soldiers often relied on rumor and perception to make sense of the chaos around them. Facing relentless advances carried out by disciplined infantry created an impression of overwhelming force, even when actual numbers were limited. Apache soldiers, operating within these advances, became part of that psychological weight. As winter approached, conditions deteriorated. Cold, mud, and exhaustion replaced heat and dust as primary challenges. Apache soldiers adapted again, demonstrating that their effectiveness was not tied to any single environment. World War II demanded versatility, and those who possessed it became invaluable across seasons and terrains. Within the Army's internal culture, the steady performance of Apache soldiers gradually normalized their presence in demanding roles. What had once been viewed with caution became routine through repeated success. This shift did not occur through policy changes or public statements, but through accumulated battlefield evidence during World War II. Patton's emphasis on relentless offense meant that rest periods were brief and often interrupted. Units were expected to move, fight, and move again. Apache soldiers, accustomed to long physical exertion, were able to maintain operational effectiveness even as fatigue accumulated. Their endurance reduced strain on unit cohesion at moments when exhaustion could otherwise lead to breakdowns. The war also revealed the limitations of romanticized narratives about warriors. Apache soldiers were not fighting as symbols of the past, but as modern soldiers navigating artillery barrages, armored assaults, and logistical constraints. World War II stripped away myth and replaced it with practical demands that only training and adaptability could meet. Communication within units benefited from soldiers who remained observant and calm. Apache troops often noticed subtle changes in terrain or enemy behavior that others overlooked, contributing to tactical adjustments that reduced casualties. In World War II, such small advantages could determine whether an engagement ended quickly or escalated into prolonged combat. Despite their contributions, Apache soldiers were rarely singled out for commendation in official announcements. Decorations tended to follow traditional lines, reflecting broader institutional patterns. Yet within units, respect was earned and acknowledged informally, shaping how soldiers viewed one another in the shared experience of World War II. As Allied forces closed in on Germany, resistance intensified in pockets, demanding careful coordination rather than reckless speed. Apache soldiers continued to operate effectively in these conditions, reinforcing Patton's belief that aggressive action must still be grounded in awareness and control. The presence of Apache soldiers under Patton's command illustrates a broader truth about World War II, that the conflict forced institutions to rely on capabilities they had previously marginalized or misunderstood. Necessity overrode prejudice, at least on the battlefield, revealing potential that peacetime structures had failed to recognize. When the fighting finally slowed and units paused to regroup, the contrast between wartime necessity and peacetime reality became clear. Apache soldiers had proven themselves indispensable in combat, yet their future within the army and society remained uncertain. World War II had changed perceptions on the battlefield faster than it changed them at home. Patton's legacy is often framed around speed, armor, and bold leadership, but embedded within that legacy is the quieter story of the soldiers who made his operations possible. Apache troops were among those who translated his aggressive vision into sustained action, bridging the gap between command intent and battlefield reality. Their experience underscores how World War II reshaped understandings of effectiveness and loyalty. Apache soldiers fought not to redefine narratives, but to fulfill their roles as soldiers. In doing so, they exposed the gap between how they were viewed and what they were capable of achieving. The unfolding story of their service continues to challenge simplified histories of World War II. It reveals a conflict fought not only by famous generals and named divisions, but by individuals whose contributions were essential even when recognition was delayed or denied. As the army transitioned toward the final phases of the war, the lessons learned from relying on Apache soldiers remained embedded in operational memory. Performance had spoken where policy had hesitated, leaving an imprint on how capability was understood in the context of World War II.